Hello everyone. This is going to be a short description of the assignment since we're into the week where you're going to be working on the assignment. I thought I would go over that a little more detail than what I did in the previous little video. You should know the materials for this week are just to give you a background on what artificial intelligence is in case you don't know about it, just some interesting facts about it, the debate that's going on around it. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to incorporate that material into the paper. It's just so you have the context of where we're going to ask this question. And that's what's right there. Is AI a mind? So I'm going to try to explain that. That's one part of this paper. Before we can even ask that question, we got several parts to do. So that's why I want to go through this to make it a little clearer, or try to make it clearer what you're going to have to do. All right, so to begin, let me just give you an overview of the paper. First, you're going to be addressing this particular question. Assuming that AI is possible and exists, all right, we're making that assumption. Say it is out there right now. Then, given the theory of mind you have presented, would that theory say AI is actually a mind or not? So to get to that, we've got several steps you got to do first. And that's why there's 4 parts to this. And you should treat each of these kind of like relatively short in-class essay test questions. So this is more, instead of giving you a test, I prefer to have you write papers. But these are really, there's 4 distinct questions you have to address. And that's why there's 4 parts to the paper. First, you need to explain what the problem of mind is. All philosophy deals with problems, and I want you to get in the habit and understand that how philosophy raises a problem and addresses it. So what is the problem of mind? The second part is explain one theory of mind. You're going to be using a theory we've discussed in class. You're not making up your own theory. And then you're going to present one argument to support that theory. And again, it's not your argument. You're summarizing an argument that someone else has presented. And then finally, we can take that theory and say, given this theory of mind, that this theory would claim AI does or does not have a mind, and explain why you think that's what the theory would say. Okay, so that's to get to that question, that overarching question of whether AI has a mind. We've got several steps to do, and that's what you need to be able to keep in mind. So first one, the problem. This is the first section, and I'm trying to explain this to you. So the question here is the experience of common sense or observation what's real? It's a subjective versus objective question. So when I think about it and I experience my life, I feel like I have a mind, I have a conscience. Whatever it is, if you want to call it a soul, whatever it is, we feel like there's something distinct from the physical body we have. There's this subjective experience we have about that. That's common sense. Of course we have a mind. What are you talking about? But upon observation, or if we take an objective view and we look at something else and we start dissecting a human being, there's no mind there. There's nothing else there except organs and guts and blood and everything else. So that conflict between these two is what grounds this issue. We have this experience. That's common sense. We experience a mind. That's what we feel. In this picture, the guy's sitting there watching a screen in his mind. That's what we do. We see things in our mind. We know it. We have that mind. But we can't find it. There's no way you can't dissect a person and find it. Descartes was the dualist of all dualists, and he actually cut up cadavers. That's why he found the pituitary gland to explain the link between the body and the mind. But we can't find it. There's nothing there. It's an immaterial object. So what do we do? Sorry, I hit the button. So the question is, and how do we account for this conflict? That's what the theories of mind try to address, is how do we account for that conflict between our common sense view and what we can observe, between the subjective experience and the objective realization when we look at the problem from stepping back a bit. And that's where philosophy usually comes into play. These problems come in the common sense view versus what we start noticing about it when we think about it. All right, so you have to explain that problem here between the experience of a mind and the fact that we can't find it. So how are we going to account for that? That's the first step. You got to do that. That's one question you're going to be able to address. The next part, and there's two parts here. I combined them into this slide. So take a second, read the Calvin and Hobbes, and don't do it. Okay, Calvin and Hobbes, my favorite cartoon. So give you a second here. All right, don't write a paper like that. That's not what we're looking for. So what you are going to do, you're going to present one theory. Present the theory of dualism, behaviorism, reductive materialism, or functionalism. You're going to give me the key points of that theory. What you're doing is summarizing and explaining what someone else said. This is an introductory level class. I can't stress this enough. You're not creating your own theory of mind. You're telling me what you understand one of these other theories is. That's all you're doing. You're summarizing. This is a summary aspect of the assignment. So I'm looking at, do you get all the key points down and have you explained it? And this is one place where an illustration can really help because it helps clarify what those key points are. But the idea here is you're just summarizing what one of the theories is. Then you're going to defend it by presenting one argument from the material in class. I always make sure I give you at least two. There's lots of arguments for these theories, but I give two of the bigger ones that are out there. You're going to take one of those and present it. And that's how you defend the argument. You don't create your own argument. And I'm looking that it's clear, complete, and accurate. That's what I do. Can you tell me it back? Can you give it back to me? And what you want to be able to do is explain, and this is one step beyond just a summary here, is that you're going to explain why it proves the theory of mind you've presented is the best account of what mind is and how it addresses that initial problem we have. So all of this is primarily summary information. You're doing a summary aspect of presenting a theory, explaining it, and the argument that's presented from. This comes from the material, so you don't have to come up with your own theory or your own argument to defend the theory you're talking about. Just keep that in mind. A lot of people think I'm asking you, when I say present one argument to defend it, that I'm asking people to come up with their own argument. That's a way higher level skill than I want you to be able to do for this class. If you were doing a 300 level class, then we could talk about something like that. But at this point, you're just summarizing the theory and the argument. Again, I'm stressing this, it's not your argument, so don't do that. Don't present your argument. Don't think you have to do that. Just go into the material and find those arguments. All right, now we get to the question. Finally, we get to the question of whether AI has a mind. And the first thing you have to keep in mind, assume we're in the future and it exists. Okay? Don't start this by trying to argue whether or not AI is possible. We're going to assume it does happen. All right, this is the fear. People are afraid it will happen. Well, let's assume that it is. Are we going to then say it has a mind? So would this theory claim whatever AI is, if it's this robot, computers, whatever, does it have a mind? So, and what you have to do is keep in mind that key point of the theory. So dualism looks at a mind being something distinct from a body. Can we find that in material substance? If it's behaviorism, they define and explain what mind is in terms of actions and behaviors. So this is possible with AI. Reductive materialism looks at that one-to-one correspondence between mental states and brain states. And we want to be able to find that. Can we find that in AI? In functionalism, the focus is on doing what a mind does. Does it do what we think a mind does? If it does, that's what constitutes a mind. So you're going to then take that key idea out of the theory and then address whether AI has a mind and be able to account why that theory would claim it is a mind or is not a mind. Okay? That's what you want to do. So that's your fourth question, and that's why I keep saying it. Think of it as in 4 questions. I want you to be able to formulate it as a single flowing essay, and I think it's important that you get practice writing essays in general, but think when you prepare this, think of it, I got 4 questions I've got to answer, 4 points that I got to make in this paper. Okay, now these are the don'ts. These are things I've seen over the years, in some for this specific paper, but for in general, these things happen all the time. So I want to stress these. Forget to explain the problem. A lot of times people will forget to explain what the problem of mind is in this context. Whatever the question is, we're going to do the issue of truth for the next topic. And people won't explain what the problem is. Why is question of mind and what the mind is a problem? So make sure you take time to explain that. Then people will try to come up with their own original ideas. And I don't want this. Again, this is a 100 level class, or 1000 level. We are just trying to understand the ideas of other philosophers who presented on this issue over time. I'm not asking you to come up with your own original idea. Philosophy doesn't do that. They don't start there, just like any other discipline doesn't start there. That's high level philosophical work, and we're not doing that here. Okay? And similarly, along those same lines, you're not presenting your own argument. I'm not asking you to develop your own argument here. I'm asking you to be able to recount the argument that someone else has said. Explain somebody else's argument. That's what I want you to be able to do. It's basic. I want you to keep that in mind. You're recounting for me. You're explaining what other people have said. And that I noticed this last time that a lot of people just jump right into the final question and start talking about AI. That's what this paper is about. Remember, we're doing Introduction to Philosophy. The topic is philosophy of mind. That's the main topic. I'm giving you AI as a more concrete example of how this philosophical, very abstract ideas can be applied to normal everyday settings. This is a question that researchers are going to have to decide, and it's going to impact legal studies, it's going to impact scientific studies, ethical studies on research. A lot of these things will come down to the question, if this stuff comes to be, if artificial intelligence comes to be, does this have a mind that we can then say, yeah, we've got to deal with things like rights of it, protections that AI should have. Those type of questions are going to come up. So we have to answer this question first of whether it's a mind. And that's why I'm doing it. But it's not for the focus. Okay, I'm still looking to see that you understand theory of mind. And along those lines, some people will tend to focus and say, well, AI isn't even possible. That's not the question. The question is, assuming it is created and it exists, would we say it has a mind? So don't get into the debate of whether it's possible or not. If you want to do that, I can give you a whole bunch of articles on that. There's an issue, and I raised that in some of this week's material. In week 4, I gave you some of that material, but it's there just as extra if you want to look into the subject further. It's not the focus of this paper, so keep that in mind. Okay, so if you have any questions, just give me a shout. I'll be happy to. This week, there's nothing else. I gave you time to work on the paper as opposed to doing a discussion. I'll get everything else caught up this weekend here, and have a good weekend. And if you do have questions, give me an email, drop me a message.